course, a huge deal. It took 5 years of negotiations, 5 days of intense negotiations, but it's not really a done deal yet because U.S. Congress still has to approve it. Or is it a done deal?
No, it's not a done deal. Both houses of Congress have to approve it, but it's easy in the sense that they don't get to nitpick at it. They either vote for it or vote against it.
So you think it will pass the U.S. process and go through?
I think it will, perhaps not initially, and the reason for that is we have an election year, and there are some candidates, both on the extreme left and on the extreme right, that are somewhat against the trade agreement. So there'll be a little bit of bickering, but I think that after all is said and done, perhaps for more certain, after the elections in 2016, we might be able to see it get through.
Some version of it, perhaps a little bit more watered down once Congress gets through with it. Well, what we know now is we have about a 30-page deal. We don't really know the details because of the nature of the negotiations, but what do you think are the highlights that you expect to see in this agreement?
I think the highlights are that there's certainly going to be a lot more reform. Markets are getting more open. Tariffs are going to be coming down. More countries are going to be involved in the process. It's a good deal for global economic trade. Obviously, some companies and some interest groups are not going to be happy and others are going to be elated. Right. But I think on a net basis, it's a good deal.
For the average consumer around the world, what does that mean? I
think for the average consumer, it means that now they can actually buy products perhaps a lot cheaper. They won't be tariffs, so there won't be higher prices. And they certainly are going to promote greater efficiency, which historically has translated into higher standard of living for the people producing the products.
One of the big sticking points has been this issue of drug patents. Why was this a big deal, and where do you think that stands now?
No, it's a big deal because the U.S. wanted, for the biologics, they wanted 12-year exclusivity, which means that you could not really unravel the product and sell them to generics. The deal is basically a 5-year minimum, and some countries might have a little bit longer if they want, but guess what? The possibility of arbitrage exists, so many pharmaceutical companies in the United States are not necessarily going to be too happy with this.
Pharmaceutical companies not so happy, some labor unions not so happy, some environmental activists also not so happy.
Oh, that's true, but we've made great progress. On the labor union front, there were a lot of issues with what was going on in Vietnam and Malaysia, and I'm told that some of the details will in fact be a lot more favorable than people thought.
Well, Anthony, now we have an agreement involving about 40% of the world's economy. China, the world's second largest economy, is excluded. China did not participate. It had some reluctancy about some of the guidelines, some of the regulatory frameworks that were part of the deal. What does this mean for China?
I think what it means is going to promote even further structural reform and financial market reform. And I think over time, I think that things will change so that either China comes in, or certainly we will see a greater incentive for that bilateral treatment between the United States and China to take place and make further progress. So I actually think this is a great incentive for China, and no one is saying that China cannot come in at a later date.
So you think China will join the TPP at a later date, or is it more likely that it will form an alternative trading bloc?
Well, I think they are going to proceed to form an alternative trading bloc. But I think over time, and you saw that with the NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico and the United States, now this is getting morphed into something even bigger. So I think the Chinese will also move into that direction. Well, it's going to take time, but it will happen.
Well, President Obama made a big deal of highlighting China's absence. When he was discussing the agreement, he said, and I quote, "When more than 95% of our potential customers live outside our borders, we can't let countries like China write the rules of the global economy." I'm not going to interpret that statement. I'm going to let you interpret that statement.
I think that that is just a statement that is creating incentives for China and many other countries that are not involved to basically move in the direction of opening up markets a lot more, removing a lot of the trade barriers. Clearly, if those things happen, no country, including China, would be excluded.
We haven't really heard anything official from Beijing yet. Long week holiday happening there. But many Chinese analysts think that the whole thing was conceived to hold China back.
I don't really think that that's the case. I think in the short run, if China is not joining, it's certainly not a positive. Nobody would argue with that. But it certainly will, in fact, give the pro-reform advocates in China a lot bigger voice to continue to promote open market capital reforms, eliminate the capital controls. All those things, once we move in that direction, these objections disappear.
Anthony, who are the biggest winners here?
Clearly Japan,
Clearly
because
Japan.
we know that Shinzo Abe had gotten the first arrow, the second arrow, but that third arrow of structural reform was certainly lagging, and the real challenge now, this basically, I don't want to say gives them a license, but it certainly provides an opportunity and a catalyst to pursue that. And after you saw the prior calendar quarter registering minus 1.2% growth, and I think that in the third quarter, as much as minus 1%, which is another technical recession, this is a shot in the arm with to boost the overall economy in Japan a little further.
Definitely a big deal for Japan and for the world. Thank you so much, Anthony Chan, Chief Economist at Chase.